Hi, I'm Charlie Felter. I'm your native English language teacher, and I'm from London. Right, today we're going to speak about the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen. Yeah? And what can we say about her? Well, it's a very English thing, you know, the royalty. There are, you know, a lot of people are attached to the nobility, to the royalty in England. They think it's, you know, England couldn't live without it. Some people think differently. Why does it have? Is it such a huge symbol in England? Well, first of all, because she's one of the richest people on the planet. So that's for sure. The other thing is the way we view culture. So in England, you know, it's not like in most of the ex-Soviet Union countries where there wasn't any sort of class system. In England, there is this situation where there are different groups of people in society, and you know, you like it or you don't like it. It's just the way it is, and it's very difficult to move from one group to another. So from what they call a class, from one class to another, and they sort of view their point of view is that the nobility has the monopole on culture and education and science and the arts, and it's kind of true, because if you think about it, you know, this is a little bit of history. Back in the days, not now, because now it's a little bit different. Some aristocrats don't have any money. It's, well, not many, but some. Back in the days, these people. Well, what happens in England is the aristocrats. What they do, they own the land, which is not what happens here or in lots of other countries. The aristocrats pass on the land from generation to generation, and that's basically it. And some of these people not knowing what to do, they decide, well, they're gonna be helpful in the world of culture and education and science, and they decide they're gonna, you know, they build trusts and funds and all kinds of financial, sort of small financial, well, sometimes not that small, sometimes institutions to help development and research in certain fields and certain spheres. And that's very typical to England. So if you're you know, I think it's linked to. I think this aspect is linked to the royalty. I think it's linked to the nobility, because I went to a royal school when I went to boarding school. I went to the patron of my school was Prince Charles, and I really liked him personally. It was, yeah. I mean, I don't think I've met him, but he's funny. You know. And he was the patron of our school, and I'm very glad and grateful that people like this in England, because he cared. I mean, in my opinion, he at the time he cared about culture and he cared about the arts, and people like me were then able to study and have a scholarship, and were given a chance, and I think that was very, very, very good. Honestly, very, very, very good. So some people in the nobility, some nobles think that some lords think culture is very important, and they dedicate their time to culture. So if we think, you know, if we look back, you know, a long time ago, lots of aristocrats spent their time studying theology, you know, which is the study of religion. You know, they would study this, or some research, a lot of research in medicine was promoted by aristocrats, or they did the research themselves. Or for example, in chess, there was the first world champion who was was he the first? I think he was the first world champion, chess world champion. Oh no, he was the first person, I think, who wrote about chess academically. I think one of the first people who wrote about chess academically, who was an aristocrat and he was a musician in France. He was called. I'll remember it. But it was basically they had time. So they had time. So they said, well, we'll study a subject, and they did that really, really, really well. And they pushed their limits, and they needed intellectual integrity. That was very important to them. And as I said, so some of them needed to develop intellectual integrity in their studies, and it was very important. And that's how in England it became, what was so typical about the English is, in some ways, they're very disciplined. You won't see someone jumping the queue, or everybody will wait one by one. People respect your own space, they're very careful about space and what they say. Sometimes they look, it's just morals and very, in some ways education is very, very strict, and it can hurt a little bit, but I think that comes from that's where it comes from, is they what happened is what still happens is the idea that they haven't, well, I don't know, it's one point of view. I don't only believe this, I sometimes think other things, and it's possible to think of it in a different way. But some people view this aspect as they spend their time learning things and developing ideas intellectually, and this knowledge grows, and the idea is they pass it on to others, and that's what it was like. And that's what it is like very often still now, because there are funds, like I said, funds, trusts, foundations, and if studying in England can be very expensive, and the people very often who lead these funds, who are the owners of these funds, very often are from the aristocracy. And very, very often they're linked to finance as well. So because finance is people were very attached to Lady Diana because they really, really liked her. And but some people don't view the aristocracy as a good thing. I think it's good to look at the good side, because otherwise everybody, it can be sad. So we have to, and funny at the same time. So we have to. Some people think it isn't fair. Some people think that knowledge and culture and education and facilities and the right to develop your own abilities, the right and human rights are for everyone and for everybody. And I'm not, the only one who can tell you about this. From the people who lived in the ex-Soviet Union, probably, the oldies of the time, that's what they believed in. They believed that, let's all be very, have the same rights, and they achieved that. And in some ways, some people nowadays, where I am here, think differently now. I think it shouldn't be like this, because I think maybe they wanted it to change. But there are still a lot of people in the world, there are a lot of people in England who think that it isn't fair. Who think that it isn't fair that if you are a lord, then your children are going to be lords. That's how we see it. Maybe I don't. That's how I see it. So your parents, your children are going to be lords, and you think and that's normal, and they can, and you just pay them money. You just pay them money till the rest of their lives. And basically in England that's legal, and you just got to live with it. And you'll find that some people, some of these royals or nobles actually give a lot to society, and that's the good way to look at it if you want to live there. It's absolutely necessary. You can't live in England and you don't like the Queen. It just, they'll tell you that yes, you can say what you like, but it's not true. It's not true. You have to. That's the minimum it takes to live there. You know, you have to respect the Queen. You don't know. Maybe you'll be lucky enough to meet her one day. But basically, when you meet her, you got to kneel down. You know, you got to bow and do all kinds of things. Personally, I don't know if I believe in these things, but I don't know if I think if this is right or not. But that's what people did. That's what people have done, and that's what people will keep on doing. So in reality, there's a huge hierarchy, which is, yeah, let's face it. In Ukraine, I've met people who were, you know, I've taught students who were leading people in this country, and honestly, I don't feel this hierarchy. I feel people basically in these. I mean, where I am right now, the idea is you don't have a work. It's kind of like your fault, because you know, and nobody should be entitled to give you something. So in some ways, you know, that, but what differs from England is when people become sort of richer and all these things. Some of them, they don't. What I feel is they don't. There isn't such as distance. You know, the hierarchy isn't as great. Isn't as, you know. There isn't as much hierarchy, and even with people who could be, you know, very, very powerful, it's different. There's more, because human values are different. In England, they value your responsibility and your duty towards society very much. Here, it's different. It's how you behave. It's how you feel. They value your mood, and how you make others feel, and all these things are very nice as well, and very human, and very, very warm. It's hospitality is very important in where, you know, around here in Kyiv, and I think in this part of the world, where people are very warm and a little bit more direct as well. Because, for example, in England, people are indirect. They're not going to let you know what they feel. So, and that also comes from the nobility, from higher society, where it was considered normal not to show your emotions, because if you did show your emotions, that was a sign of weakness. If you cried, that was being weak as well. So for example, when I see, I feel that, you know, when I see young children crying here, sometimes I'm a little bit shocked, but you know, about little things, because very often, especially in higher society, I think that's what I've seen myself, is that children will be told, you're not allowed to cry, and they'll feel guilty. They'll feel very guilty, so guilt is part of our mentality, where when we've done something wrong, we have to almost feel guilty. You know, it's some people may think it's not good. It's just a cultural thing. Some people may say, "Oh yes, how could you say this?" I just know it's true, and that's the one thing that the reason why I can speak about these things is because I've travelled. I've come here. I see that people are different. For here, it's more about mood and how, you know, anything could happen. We could die tomorrow. It doesn't matter. But as long as we feel good till the end, that's good. It's a bit fatalistic, nonchalant, and it's nice as well. Because hiding your emotions you don't very often. The higher you move in English society, the more you'll find that you don't know what people actually think. You know, they hide their feelings, they hide their emotions, they hide their thoughts, which is very different here, because here people are very open about what they feel. They're very direct, they're very emotional, which can be a little bit sometimes, you know, shocking. But actually you know who they are better. You just know who they are. You really know who they are. They very genuine. So it's just a different attitude, different point of view. And I think this it's sort of like English society has been manufactured by these entities, by these groups, by these higher society groups. And like I say, some people like it. You can look at it from a really positive point of view and say, well, I've been lucky enough to do all these things in England. That's because some of these trusts have helped me. Some of these funds have helped me, and that's really good. And you can if you're ambitious and you study hard and you push yourself. Basically, one of the strong views and qualities of high society in England is wit. They believe that being witty is the principal quality, is the most important quality. I don't know if I believe in this, but that's what they think, and they think that you have to justify all your arguments. So very often what will happen is you with your friend, with your English friend, basically a friend is somebody who agrees with you, and somebody who disagrees with you. Very often you can see that you could believe that they are not your friend anymore at that moment, or you think, well, why do they disagree with me? They're not my friend in reality. So, and so when you speak with an English person and they are being the devil's advocate means they just contradict you. They just say, oh no, and they're just trying to find the truth in reality. They're just trying to find out why you're saying such a thing, why you're saying this, why they want you to justify your answers. They want to come, they argue, and they say they contradict you. They oppose your arguments, and they're like being a temporary opponent to all you're saying, just to find the truth. They want that's the idea, and that's what being the devil's advocate is all about. And you'll find that people always have this. That's what it is. So they sort of hide their emotions, hide their feelings, hide their values. They might believe certain things, but they say the opposite of what they think. They ask you questions, and you think, well, I would have never thought he'd believe this. I wouldn't. But they don't believe it. Trying to find out what is right and what is wrong by discussing on a particular topic. And this can be very passionate. These are moments when we can be very, very passionate, and it can be very aggressive. Whereas here might be a bit different. Why would we change? Why would we have a change of mood if we feel so good and we feel great? Why would it be different? If people are happy, why do you want to disturb them? So it's very different, and that also comes from the aristocracy, because in the aristocracy you had to hide your game a little bit, and it was all about it's like, well, we don't have it in English. We don't say we don't have. We only have one way of saying you. It's the singular. The singular and plural you is the same, but the sort of more polite way of saying you doesn't exist. There might be a different tone, different way of saying you. It might sound more polite or more official. But you just imagine that in England everything is about, like what you say in Russian, v. Yeah, it's all about. It's very much about like this is. So it's very formal, and at the same time and one of the things that differentiates English society, to conclude on this topic, is humor. Because otherwise, if everything was so formal, if everything were to be so formal and so that's funny. I mean, what distinguishes English society is that people are very formal, but at the same time quite funny, quite unique, quite original. You have to think about their jokes. And in England, this attention to subtleties and details, is very British, and I think a lot of these things come from the nobility. It's not to say I'm in favor of it. I'm not in favor of it. This is just I think it's a point of view. I think it's being quite objective to say it, but I think that's why English people are so attached to the royalty and they're so attached to the nobility, is because these are the values that they spread around the world. Intrinsically, it's not so direct. It's indirect. It's indirect, and I think people like that.